another Monday, the best night of the week. You know what that means? It's time for another episode of RfRx, your prescription for coping. I'm Kara, I'm your host, and I have with me the wonderful, the amazing, the 20% cooler, fearless psychic, Helen Green. Helen, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing, my friend Kara?
I am doing well. I am glad to be here
Me
and
too.
super excited about this evening. I mean, I'm always super excited about our speakers,
Well,
but
it's never a boring evening. We definitely, learn a bunch of things and have interesting conversations and stuff. So it's never boring. That's what
no,
makes Monday nights amazing.
that's true. That's true. And the fact that we're 20% cooler for the episodes that you're here on.
Yep, that's
There's
my
also
goal,
that.
to extend my coolness to others and spread it around.
And we appreciate that act of service.
I know, that's why I'm here.
I love it. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to bring on a few familiar faces here to give us an update on what's going on with RfR in Australia. Come
Greetings
on in.
from down under.
Hello. G'day.
Greetings from far, far, far away, thousands of miles away. We have begun our RfR tour in Australia. Sasha, you could unmute yourself too if you'd like to join in with our report. Phil and I have been here coming up on a week now. We've had full, busy days. We met with the Sydney support group. I'm sorry that Rachel's not in the room right now. It was an unbelievable group. There was a person who attended who hadn't even been to a support group meeting yet because they were so vested in being a part of the group. But we have, first of all, I can't say anything without saying that Sherry and Sasha have gone over the top in taking care of us every place we've been, and all of the things that they have shown us and the driving that they've done for us. It's been wonderful. But we certainly have had the opportunity to hear a lot of stories. Some are similar and some are a little bit different, but it's all part of our effort to bring RfR and to develop RfR into what it has potential to be here down under. I'll let the others chime in a little bit.
Phil.
Oh, wow. I will say for myself, it's been just an amazing experience thus far. And that's, when we went out to the park, I didn't know what to expect for this first meetup when we did there out in the park with the support group. And there were so many people that came out, and just getting a chance to talk to everybody, hear their different perspectives. There was so much variation, and there's similarities, but there's also so many unique experiences that people bring to the table from their part of the world. It was just amazing to hear everybody, and then we had discussions about how to proceed and how things would be better. Being able to have those organic discussions and try to reach consensus, or at the very least bounce ideas off of one another about what's the best way of moving forward and everything else. And got to meet some speakers that will be going on later on this week. Later on next week, should I say, in one of the larger events. And that was amazing to see them in person. So it's just been wonderful so far. And of course, Pride. It was a sea of humanity out there, and it goes on for weeks of activities out here. And so it's been a blast. It's been warm, it's been humid, but it's been wonderful. I wouldn't trade it. And thanks so much. I'll reiterate what Gail said to wow, Sasha and Sherry. I'm just combining names there. Their ship name, I guess. But we're showing us so many different places around the wilderness out here, waterfalls and other places. It's just been incredible.
Yeah, we're having a really good time, and we've got a lot of things planned yet for the rest of this week and into next week. And of course, Dr. Ray arrives in 2 days' time. We're having a mini fall excursion this weekend for our RfR leadership group here in Australia, which I'm really looking forward to. And then after our big one-day conference that we have next week on Monday at University Technology Sydney, along with Recovering from Religion. You'll see a lot happening about that, and there are still tickets available for that. So I'll make sure we put the Zoom link or the Eventbrite link into the notes for anyone that would like to just watch the goings on of that day. It will be recorded, so if the timing doesn't work out for you because it's some stupid time for you, which is possible, then you can always catch the recordings later. And then following that, Dr. Ray and I do a bit of a tour throughout Australia. We'll be going to Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane, and then back to Sydney for more speaking events and also more hangouts with just all sorts of people that want to see what recovering from religion is all about. So we got lots happening.
Sasha?
And yeah, thank you, Gail. And I think just to add that while we're talking about all these big events, almost like the aerial view of everything that we're doing as an organization around the world and then here in Australia, the fact that on a micro level, there are individuals whose lives are genuinely being helped and improved because of all of the work that every single one of us does amongst the RfR umbrella. And we're seeing people go from shells of themselves with fear and insecurities about where they're going in their life. And because of the structures and the organization and the support and the hope, healing and support that we provide through recovering from religion, we are seeing people get this strength of character, get this ability to bounce forward with absolute enthusiasm. So yeah, whatever we're all doing, whatever aspect we're all a part of at recovering from religion, whether we're regular attendees of groups, whether we're volunteers, whether we do things behind the scenes, whether we're just there to support one individual, that's what it's all about. There are individuals whose lives are genuinely being improved, and we're seeing that every day, even with the expansion here. So yeah, wonderful work, and thank you to those who ran the gauntlet and paved the way, and all of those analogies for all of us now moving forward.
Thank you all so much. I am going to echo some of the comments that are being made in the chat, which is that we are so glad y'all are there. And I think about half of us wish we were there with you, but we know y'all are doing an excellent job out there representing RfR and Pride as well, and making the news. So
And thank you
congrats.
everybody for your well wishes and all of your support. And many of you in this room are also donors, and those donations and your generous contributions have gone to funding this trip. And it's just been incredibly important to the future of RfR in Australia. I've dropped into the, didn't come up as a link.
We'll have to.
I can't put the Eventbrite link in there, so I may have to just try to type out instructions on how you can do that. But thank you for giving us a few minutes time, Kara, and thank you to our guests for joining us, Erin. We're looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and Gail, if you send me that link, I might be able to drop it into the chat as well. So yeah, definitely. Thank you all. And that was a great update. Without further ado, Helen, would you like to introduce our speaker this evening?
I would. So Erin is a host of the call-in show Truths Wanted with the atheist community of Austin, where they talk to people about what they believe and why. She grew up in a charismatic Pentecostal family, words, and did it all. The Sunday school, Awanas, Bible memorization. I have no idea what that is. I am curious now.
I do.
Oh, see, us Catholics don't have that. Youth groups, purity rings, summer camps, faith healing, and speaking in tongues. Awesome. She did a long-term missionary work, played worship bands, and even went to Bible college for a while. In 2019, she, now married with 2 kids, she deconstructed her faith completely and became an atheist. She's first started sharing her story anonymously online, which quickly turned into her becoming an outspoken atheist activist. She now hosts a call-in show and is an active member of many online and in-person atheist organizations. Her journey from Christianity to an atheist activist has meant looking back and dissecting the harm caused by extreme supernatural beliefs. Now she continues to share her experiences and tries to help others and to think deeply about what they believe and why. So welcome, Erin. I am sorry if I kind of butchered that. Words are hard. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Oh, hi. Thank you. That was great. I enjoyed that a lot. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on tonight. I am really happy to be here.
And we are super happy to have you. I have been looking forward to this episode for a while, so I cannot wait. I'm super pumped about it.
We did plan it a while ago, so I'm glad it's finally here too.
Yes. And for people who don't know you, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up here after all of what Helen described?
Yeah, so as Helen mentioned, like I grew up in a charismatic Pentecostal family here in Canada. So it was like very energetic kind of worship services where we emphasize a lot on like spiritual life, spiritual warfare, speaking in tongues, faith healing, all of that. So that was my primary kind of upbringing. And then as I moved away, like as I moved literally away from my hometown, I did end up kind of in a more I guess I would say like more of a balanced kind of Christianity, if you can say that from this point. But in my mind, I left the more extreme kind of versions of a charismatic religion, and I moved into kind of just a more seeker sensitive kind of churches where it was emphasis on music and small groups and that sort of thing. I did get married when I was 20, and I will share a little bit more about that later on for a short time. I'm not married to that person any longer, and I was involved a lot with like the early 90s or late 90s purity culture and purity rings and all of that. I never went to a purity ball. I get asked that a lot. I never went to the ball itself, but I did have a purity ring that had my parents' birthstones on it and my birthstone on it. So very creepy. But I am married with 2 kids now. And so when my eldest was about 8 years old, I started my deconstruction, and it just went all the way out. I did take a little dive into some like supernatural new age beliefs, but then I realized that it was the same thing, different different labels, and then I ended up being all the way out. From there, I did have kind of like I didn't have a community like this. I didn't know where to go because I did it all by myself, and no one else in my family or none of my friends had gone through this process. It was just very much a solitary experience. So I went online. And initially, I started kind of sharing my story on Twitter. I did have my kind of moment where I was on Twitter, just, expressing myself. And I ended up getting some followers there. And then eventually came out as, I showed my face, I shared my name, and then it snowballed from there. And then now I about 8 months later, I was doing a call-in show on the atheist community of Boston. So there's a little bit more in between that, but that's the quick version of it.
Man, you and Stacy both, y'all caught on quick.
Yes. Yeah. You had my sister-in-law on a couple of weeks ago, I think. Our story's funny. I don't know if she mentioned it. She and I did not go through this together. I didn't influence her at all. I did not lead her to hell. I had my own thing going on. And I actually spent a lot of time hiding that part of my life online to like my extended family. But she went through her own process, and she ended up finding my stuff, because if you look, you can find it. So, and then it was a wild day. I got a text message from her, and she's like, "You're never going to guess." So yeah, I do have
imagine
other
that was probably not what you were expecting the nature of that text message to be about.
No, not at all. Especially from her. Yeah.
Stranger things have happened. So.
Yep.
Well, I am super excited to have you here this week, and especially for our episode this evening. So, for a little bit of context, we've been talking about various aspects of love and relationships this month on RfRx to highlight some of the ways that, for some of us, our religious beliefs may have limited our options or made us feel ashamed about our desires or ourselves. And so this week, we're going to continue that conversation and talk about one of my favorite topics, which I found out is maybe one of your favorite topics too. Yep. Books.
Yep.
And so we've talked a lot about some of the more widely read purity culture books of the 90s, like True Love Waits, on other episodes. Like we have a purity culture episode. So we don't have to go super deep into that this time around. But I'm wondering, Erin, what are some of the other Christian marriage books that you were exposed to, and were any of them particularly impactful for you?
Yes. So there's so many to choose from, but I have chosen 3 books that I want to talk about tonight. And I'm talking from my frame of reference. I've been in a long-term monogamous relationship for a long time. And so there was a lot of that influence for many, many years. Obviously, I was a Christian at the time, so I would I would look out for Christian advice, and I was given a lot of Christian marriage and relationship books for a long time. So I have 3 books I want to talk about tonight. It was hard to pin it down, but these 3, I think, had the most impact on me personally. So I don't know, do you want to go through one at a time, or want me to list them off right away so people can look them up and see how crazy they are?
Oh, yeah, tell us the names of them first, and then
Okay.
we'll go through them.
To be
So
fair,
the-
this is my first introduction to these type of books because
Okay.
it is an adventure, so I am curious, girl. So teach me.
Okay. So the first book that I want to bring up, I haven't met very many other people who've read the book, but it's called Sheet Music by Kevin Lehman. And this book was given to me as a wedding gift on my wedding day to my first husband. And we read that book on our honeymoon, and I was horrified. And I will go into details about that shortly. The second book is, everyone's heard of this one, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. That one, I think, is probably the most well-known, like widely in even non-religious settings books. Everybody seems to have heard of it. And then the third one I want to talk about, which I think is probably maybe the most harmful of the three, is Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs. This book is really, in my experience, was really promoted amongst married couples specifically, for kind of setting up your gender roles and that sort of thing too. And this one has been widely criticized, even within the Christian denominations now, for being one of the most harmful books ever put out about marriage.
Yeah, and that is saying something.
Yeah.
I actually remember that one as well. And like you, I received a stack of Christian marriage books when I got married. I think I got them when I got engaged as well.
Yeah.
It was kind of unsettling because it seems like the idea is, well, we've hidden this information from you all this time. Now is the moment for you to learn all about love and marriage and sex and relationships. And then, like you, I was horrified with some of what I read.
Definitely. So like I had mentioned earlier, I was part of the late 90s purity culture. I had the purity ring. And when I got married at 20, I was a virgin. I had true love had waited and all that. So I was given that's funny.
Sorry.
That I was given this book as a well-intended gift from someone in my family, because they knew that I was very inexperienced. And so this first book, Sheet Music by Kevin Lehman, is literally a Christian sex book. It's like the Christian version of, that really wide known sex book.
Okay.
So Sheet Music is, like I said, essentially a Christian sex book. It promotes according to God's plan, which I now looking back think is funny that it doesn't mention anything about concubines or second wives or any of that. Sex is designed for within the marriage bed only. It is obviously gender binary, not inclusive in any way. Some of the ideas that were promoted in it were that the glue that holds a relationship together, and that has this supernatural, ethereal quality to it. So if something happens on a supernatural level when you become one, the overall the point of the book, I guess. I want to say that a couple things in this book that I think can look back now and they'll say we're somewhat positive, in that it's enjoyable for both people. It should be fun, have, be variable. There is some, like I said, graphic details about positions if you're newly into this stuff, which most young Christians are, especially if you're raised in purity culture. But what I think is more important is we talk about the kind of harmful things that came through on the ideas of this book. Do you want me to jump into those now?
Yes, please. I think the audio is back up and working, so go for it.
Okay. So the cons of this book, I will say, is that it has the very typical kind of male are visual, women are emotional framework. That men have needs that are physical and they're frequent, and there's real conversation about anything. If anything goes wrong in like that area, there's not a lot of conversation about what health issues are going. It's kind of this all or nothing. Men are like this, women are like this, and to have sex regardless of desire. So in a lot of ways, it is promoting non-consensual sexual relations. There little or no focus on low desire issues with men. It's almost always focused on the women in this book. And the other thing I wanted to say is that this book often calls women the bride and the men the groom. So when they're talking about like anything going on with it, they'll say, you know, take your bride and do this. And it's just very weird now looking back on it. It was very disturbing to me. Even I remember when I was reading it, I felt really uncomfortable. The brunt of the responsibility for a good sex life is pretty much all on the bride to make sure things are going well. And even if there is something, if there's low desire on his part, it's going to fall onto her of why maybe she's not being as seductive enough or that sort of thing. So it was really intimidating for me as a newly married 20-year-old who had no really experience with this sort of thing, going into it, realizing that this huge apparently responsibility for my husband's happiness, well-being was now on my shoulders. And that was just the way it was. That it was a lot to put on a young person. And in my mind, I look back and I think I was quite childish in a lot of ways because I hadn't really had a lot of life experience at the time. So that is the Christian sex book, sheet music.
Well, and that's a really good point. I think that that was a big kind of theme for me as well. I mentioned it was similar in my case too. I think a lot of the audience for these books is intended to be young newlyweds who don't have any experience with sex and very limited experience with relationships prior to reading these books, which puts a lot of responsibility on, I feel like, the authors of these books to present good advice and thorough and accurate advice. And I'm like you, I feel like some of these were a little bit lacking in some of that. I'm interested to hear that this one actually had somewhat graphic details about sex. Most of the ones I received did not. Do you recall what some of, without being too graphic, I guess, was it like the, missionary sex only, or did it go into?
That's the thing that I put in the pro. Like I put like two things down that like this book did well in this one area, is that it actually did give like some helpful advice about like positions and like if you're, being on top or being on the bottom and like tilting, using pillows and stuff like that. There was some actual like decent advice in it. But the thing when I think about it now, I don't think I could take any of that in as actually like helpful because I had just come out of this phase where I had shut down everything physically. And like, I know a lot of people who come through purity culture talk about this, that there's this like expectation that you can just flip that switch. And now you're expected to be this very innocent and like not seductive at all person. And then the minute you're married, you're supposed to turn on your sex goddess, switch. And that now the thought to me was terrifying. It actually like scared me, I think, out of like kind of owning my own sexuality in that part, because I was reading these graphic things about like, make sure, get here, get on your knees and like put a pillow under here. And at that point, I still like, I had maybe just had sex one time when we read it. So it was terrifying to me. It was really, really overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad it had good information, but like you said, if you're not in a position to be ready to, emotionally or psychologically ready for that, it's gonna
and
go
I mean
right
just
over your head.
The very fact that they just completely gloss over like whether desire is there, or they're not like, no, there's no mention of consent, because there is this idea that marriage is the consent. So I mean, if you take that to its logical conclusion, that's a lot of harm that can be done on its own. So and at the time I didn't realize that what was missing. I just remember reading it and feeling like uncomfortable.
Yeah, because if this is the only sex education you've ever received, you don't have any other idea to fall back on. You're stuck with whichever book somebody gave you. That's now all you know about sex. And I remember reading one. I'm really glad to hear that this one had actual advice about how to have the sex, because I'm thinking back to the one I got.
Have the sex.
The sex. I got didn't have that, but I remember reading this one part. I think I've mentioned it on a different episode before, but I'm gonna tell on myself. It had this part where it was talking about doing Kegel exercises where you like strengthen your pelvic floor muscles, and it was in the section about what the wife should do. And because again, like you said, it's only husbands and wives in these books that are supposed to be having sex. And the advice was that you should be doing these Kegel exercises very regularly, which, yes, that was probably good advice. But then it said you're supposed to be doing, I can't even remember, it was some ridiculous amount, like multiple sets of 300 repetitions, like several times throughout the day, every day for the rest of your
Just
life.
make it a full-time job of staying tight, basically.
Yes, it was like an
Wow.
extreme amount, and it said you should get so good at this that you
might-
can actually, during
Yes.
sex, just all you do is lay there and do these Kegel exercises until your husband comes.
Yeah,
And
yeah, pretty
because
much.
I didn't have any other idea about how sex works, there was a period of several months where I actually thought that was like what you were supposed to do.
That is how you do the sex. You sit there and
the sex.
clench.
I
was
can
like, this
imagine
is
like
really
having
weird. I
to
don't like this.
like
Oh, yeah,
doing a
yeah.
regimen of Kegels, because like I remember like between having kids and like, you know, it's just taught as like good like vagina health, you know, but like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do like 20, and then I get 5 in and then I get distracted, then I forget that I was doing Kegels. So
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yes. We need something in between these extremes.
Yeah, and honestly, I
do
haven't
three and I
looked
get bored.
either. I haven't looked to see if there's anything better out there. This was given to me like 20 years ago now, but as far as I can tell, it's still being sold. It has not really been updated in any way. So yeah, it's just like very like and I don't even think the author himself really understands like proper biology and like how things work, because there is that idea of like that you need to do all this stuff, but like that's not how it works. And like that's something I had to unlearn like 15 years later, like, oh, learning how, you know, your actual body works, because there's this like misinformation that you're given, not even necessarily directly, but the messages that you receive from these are like how things work, because they don't tell you anything actually helpful about that. So you deduct these ideas about your own body and about your partner's bodies and like what everybody needs out of relationship. I think it also gives like, so for myself being the bride in this book, it gave me some funny ideas about what men wanted too, because I had this idea like that, like, oh, like, you know, they need this like release every 2 to 3 days, otherwise something's wrong, and then I'm doing something wrong. And just like even the idea of thinking as men like solely as like these visual creatures, you kind of gloss over the fact that like of course they are emotional, because we all are emotional, we all have emotional needs. It totally takes away like the everyone's right to have that emotional connection during any kind of intimacy. So it took a long time for me to even kind of honor that in my current partner, my current husband's, you know, his own whole person, because I still had this idea that like, oh, he's mostly a visual sexual person, and it's mostly about a physical need. So that's damaging, and that can take a long time to get out of your system.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And if you want to try turning your camera back on
Yeah, let's
again,
try
it
it.
seems like your internet has stabilized. Hey, there you are.
Okay, just let me know if I start cutting out
Okay.
again. Hi, Stacey.
Okay, I will. Hopefully I didn't jinx us with that. But yeah, I think that is a really good point. One of the major themes that I took out of these books too was that it's got those just kind of just extreme stereotypes about genders, where men are all this one way and women are all this one way, and you're all like this, but here's what to do about it. And there's just no room for men to have feelings or women to want sex.
Right. Yeah, it really limits both people, or whoever reads, it limits both of you, because it does.
Uh-oh.
Yep,
Your audio has cut out again.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm
soon.
texting my husband to see if he can help me with the internet. I don't know why.
Yeah, tell him
okay.
to stop streaming
Yeah,
on
totally.
whatever he's doing.
I was gonna say too, like the language that you described, like bride and groom, like it's like a title, and it's only supposed to be like for one day. Like,
yeah,
basically, and it's just a very dehumanizing way to refer to each other, because like I say like my partner or my husband, you know,
Yeah.
because that's what he is. You know, and to use like title like bride and groom, it almost is like this is a function you have to do as your role, rather than this being a connection between two human beings that love each other. you know, or don't love each other. Like, it's a good time. So, you know, I just don't like, it just, when you said that, it made me like, go like, oh, that's gross.
Yeah, it's creepy, right? And
Yeah.
the other thing that was creepy in this book too is like, it's a book about sex, but you can't even use like the proper like naming for things. Like he calls the men's penis his happy part, I think, or Mr. Happy or something really stupid like that. And it's like, that's not a very mature way to have like this conversation with, you know, grown adult people who are, you know, entering into this phase of their life or whatever. But I mean, it's fine if you have a euphemism within your own relationship, but as like an educational book of some sort, to call it that, it seems really bizarre.
Yeah, I feel like if you can't use anatomical terms in your writing, maybe don't be writing about this
Maybe
topic.
don't. I think you just, yeah, just maybe don't.
Just don't.
Like, I did forget, like, I know we're talking about purity culture from, you know, a charismatic Christian, but like Catholics, like I remember with my first marriage, I had to go to classes on how to be in a marriage with priests who don't have sex and are not married. So
That's hilarious.
yeah, so it is one of those things that, like, when it's been so long, so I had to like think back on that. I'm like, holy shit, I did do that like 20 years ago, you know, 25 years ago. And it's very strange when you look back on it, like how harmful, even in both contexts, the messages that you get, especially as women and men, you know, what your roles are and what you're supposed to do. And if you don't fall into those binaries, like, you know, something's wrong, you know, and it makes you all paranoid and shit. So it's very toxic and unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what else? I know we've got a couple of more books to get through. Did you have any more comments on this one, the sheet music?
Just don't give it as a wedding gift.
No, okay, not a
And
good
if
wedding
somebody
gift.
gives it
Good
to
to know.
you, just use it to light your fireplace. I don't know.
Light a romantic fireplace with
Yeah.
it. Excellent, excellent advice. Okay, so I am interested to hear your thoughts on the next one, the 5 love languages, because that's one that I think a lot of people are probably familiar with and may not have realized was even a religious book.
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, it's almost like it's just an accepted concept that's in pop culture. Like if you watch any kind of reality shows, like I'm a sucker for like reality dating shows. They're horrible, but I love watching them. If you watch any of those shows, or if you're seeing people's profiles online, like there's almost always a reference to it, like, this is my love language, what's yours? And like it's a common thing that people talk about now. Not to say that everybody has read the book, because I think if you actually read the book, you'll see the Christian undertone of it, because it is written by a Christian author. And I mean, the book is really geared towards divorce proofing your marriage. Like the language is very, very clear in it. So I myself read this book many times. Like it was my go-to as well. And it's really marketed as kind of like this fix all kind of like, this is how you make marriages work. But I think it's really simplistic in a lot of ways. And I think that the greater point being made, if there is one to draw out of it, is lost on a lot of people. So for anybody who hasn't read it, the book is, it's a book about expressing and receiving love. And there's this concept that Gary Chapman has created called your love languages, which, I mean, this is just an idea somebody wrote. I will say right off the bat, it's not necessarily an evidence-based theory that anybody's done any research into, but it's a good jumping off point to talk about how we express and receive love. The 5 love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And I think that, like I said, it's a good jumping off point for it. But one of the things that gets lost in the greater culture is this idea that it's going to be like one or the other, that they're exclusive, not that they're like built on each other, or like sometimes you need one to have the other, and there's all this nuance to it. A lot of people will think they have their love languages all figured out, but then you get into a certain kind of relationship and it turns out there's something else going on. So for my own reference, like I always thought I was an acts of service person. Turns out I'm not. It's just a nice thing I like to have when I'm living with somebody. It's not really necessarily a love language. It's more of like a common decency. I found out later on, if I'm sticking to this book, I'm more of a words of affirmation person, if you will. But the truth is I can't live without all of these things. They all build on each other, and it's this like evolving kind of network that you have on how you communicate with your partner or partners. I think that the thing that does come up with it for people who are sticking very strictly to the idea is that love languages, there are some things that can happen. Well, for one, I have heard marriage counselors talk about this before, that it can be used as kind of a scorekeeping method. Like, I know your love language is this, and I did this, but you know my love language is that, and there's this scorekeeping that you can do, and that's like a pitfall that happens because this is not a very well researched method or theory. Your love language can change. So you, like my own story, you can read this book and it can be a really good, starter kind of thing with a relationship that's going to be long term. But 5 years down the line, things change. People, you move, you have different careers, you have babies or whatever. Your love language can change, and certain times you might need something different. So the fact that it's kind of like this, again, that's kind of essentialism, that this one's a little more nuanced, but it's essentially like, this is your personality and it's static, it's going to stay the same your whole life. It doesn't give a lot of room for growth or change, or just change in preferences. So there's a couple pitfalls in it that I would say. And then the last one I will just say is that it doesn't have a lot of emphasis on kind of self-love or self-validation. It's very external. So if you're reading this and you haven't kind of done any of your own work to build up your own self-esteem, if you're low in self-esteem, it can cause you to be quite externally focused for your validation. So those are kind of my nitpicky things about this book. And I think that if it's going to be referenced in the wider culture, people should read it.
Well, there is some criticism coming out now in wider psychology circles about this. And people that are relationships experts are saying this is pseudoscience. This isn't really how human beings behave in relationships. So there is pushback coming out against this book, because I remember I didn't read the book, but I remember what's the love language, and it was in the nomenclature. So I was okay, I'm going to look it up. And I was well, I do all of these things to a varying degree in my relationship. And to a certain extent at one time or another, because I could look back on I've been with my current husband 18 years, my current one.
Yeah.
Eventually I'm going to trade him in for a new model. I'm just kidding. But we've been together for a while, and I'm I've done this to varying degrees all through my relationship. And this is not, and like you were saying, it's not fixed. It's amorphous and will change and move, depending on what you need and what your partner needs, and
right.
responding to that. So even at the time, I didn't take it 100% seriously, because I was that seems kind of sus. So
right. And I think that if for myself, there's so many other ways that you can express love.
Yeah.
I kind of joke around with my husband, one of my favorite love languages is sending people funny TikToks that I find. If I do that, it means I love you. And my husband will often send me a song on Spotify that he heard. That is a way that we express love. It doesn't really fit into the framework, I guess. I mean, maybe it could be giving a gift, but not really. So it's it's not exactly like you said, it's not held up as peer reviewed psychology research and how we know is the best way to have a fulfilling long-term relationship. So it is probably best made if it was just a blog post that somebody thought of one day and it's an interesting read, but then move on.
Right.
Yeah, it's
weird that it's got to hold so much in the broader culture.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because it's so simple, but like you said, that it's simplistic in a way. There are more than 5 kinds of people in the world, or 5 kinds of ways to show love. So, I think it's those personality tests too, all the, Myers-Briggs and everything. It's a lot of fun to take the test, and you might get a few insights about, some habits that you have or something, but it's not a complete explanation of who you are as a person and all the nuanced ways that you like to give and receive love. And
I will say that the thing that I wish that would get spoken about more is if they're going to bring up the 5 love languages, and the thing that I take away from this book, if I'm going to really pull out something of value, is the point that maybe the author was trying to say but did it poorly, was that this idea of differentiation, that your partner is not you, and that you have different ways of communicating. So if that's the point that people are taking away when they read it, then that would be really helpful, actually. So if one person likes this, that doesn't mean you have to, and there's no right or wrong way to be a person, and you're going to be different from the people or peoples that you're involved with.
Yeah, like empathy. That's a good skill. We should all do that more. Like,
Oh, and
yes.
also, this kind of struck me when, as like you were talking about coming from, like, you marry young, if you're from purity culture. So, you get into like one relationship with one person and you read this book, and then it's like this idea like, well, this is how it's supposed to be. And these are the ways that I'm supposed to express myself, within these contexts, because it has that Christian undertone to it. It feeds into these ideas of roles. Like this is how you're supposed to function in relationships. And if you don't have a broader context, or you haven't dated a lot, you haven't had different relationships, even with friends, that there's certain expectations that are put upon you, which I also think it's like terribly unhealthy.
Right. And if you read the full book and the
Mhm.
examples given by Gary Chapman, they are very like heteronormative, very Christian, like patriarchal. Like the references almost exclusively talk about the men being a physical touch person and the woman being a words of affirmation person, which kind of falls back into this like men are physical, men are visual, whatever, and women are all this way. So there's not a lot of like examples given outside of that framework. So even if you're reading it as a secular person, there's a subtle influence there of like Christian values.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was one of my big takeaways from this book too. It felt like it was kind of saying it without saying it. Like, here's some gender expectations for
Yeah.
you.
Exactly.
Again. Like, why? And they did a really good job of not making it explicit. Like, you could almost read that book. Well, not if you read the book, you would realize it's coming from a religious perspective, but you could read the highlights of it and have no idea this was a religious book. But they do sneak it in there.
Oddly, the first edition was more Christian, more outright Christian. They've actually like, this is just from my research. I have no idea what copy I had, but they have done different iterations of it because it did hit the mainstream. So it's like been in the top sellers for like 20 years or something. Like it is such a popular book to give and read. There has been actually a couple different editions made, and I think that they have taken out some of the. I know that he was widely criticized for one of the examples he gave because it did have pretty blatant like victim blaming when that kind of stuff too. Like it's been worked over a little bit to be a bit more acceptable.
So so has this fallen into like the self-help?
Yes.
Kind of. Okay. All right.
It totally has.
If you look, sounds like self-help shit.
Yeah, it is. If you look up, like, if you go on Amazon and look up marriage books, it's going to be in like the top 10.
Okay. Cool. All right. I had that sneaky suspicion. So
Yeah. So then I guess kind of the takeaway on this one is has some good information, but shouldn't be taken too seriously. So that
if you have to dig that
personality, yes.
Yeah,
like, it might be just
it's a jumping off point, right? It's a jumping off point, and like if you have to dig that hard to get the like nugget of wisdom out, then maybe don't hold it in such high esteem. That's kind of my take on it.
Fair enough. It's not the Bible of relationships, we could say.
Speaking of which, the next book. My third and final book that I want to bring up is I have written down here the worst one, because this one I think it's just that you can find story after story after story online of how much harm that this particular book is called. And when you say that it's not the Bible of books, this book practically self-describes itself as the biblical, like inerrant, unchanging truth of how God designed men and women. So this next book is The Love and Respect by Emerson. I don't know how to say the last name. Eggerix.
I already hate it.
Sure. But I'm already like cringing inside. So
yeah. This book is the key takeaways are that like wives are made to love. They want to love. They expect love. Husbands are made to be respected, want respect, and they expect respect. When a husband feels disrespected, it is especially hard to love his wife. When a wife feels unloved, it is especially hard to respect her husband. So you got this circularity happening here, and you can probably already guess who it falls onto to fix it.
Let me guess. It's women's fault to start with.
Of course, always.
Oh, because of Eve's original sin, right?
Well, so this book has a lot of biblical references. Some of them are
Oh,
very
no.
much cherry picked. I mean, that's what they all do. But this one has a lot of biblical references, and it pretty much is like self-declares that this is like the true interpretation of what God has created people to be like within a relationship. It's very inflexible with what is the main need of these two specific genders, that women need love above all else and men need respect above all else. And so there's countless examples of how to make that happen. This book is actually noted as a source even in Christian domestic violence resource centers for contributing to domestic violence amongst Christian couples. It has pretty blatant references that would absolve abusers and blame the victims. It doesn't have any kind of adequate address. Like there's nowhere in the book that it adequately addresses abuse, never mentions anything about the cycle of abuse. One of the examples in the book it's an example of a woman in an abusive marriage and talks about how she should allow her husband back into the home after he's repented, never mentioning the common phenomenon of love bombing, which is part of the cycle of abuse. So it catches especially women in these relationships in a really tough place when they're having marriage troubles, and they reach for this book because they are going to feel responsible to be kinder and more respectful to their possibly very abusive partner.
It gives us that message of like, oh, I can change him if I behave in a certain way, he won't be an asshat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like
so
we know the
gross.
biblical references to it. There's there's a biblical reference for that if you have an unbelieving spouse, and it's kind of like take that but then stretch it out over an entire 800-page book or whatever it is. It's that idea that if you are a godly enough woman and you submit and you respect enough, then you'll get the love that you need too, because he can't help but love you back, because that's how God designed him. The problem is that's absolute bullshit, and there's nothing about that is how people actually function and work, especially when somebody is an abuser. That is not the last thing they need. Is more respect.
So there's no boundaries here. There's no way to protect yourself. If someone's not treating you well, it means you're not respecting them correctly or loving them correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Again, it's with the essentialism. All women are this way, and all men are that way, and there's no anywhere in between. And even I think the main claim is false as well. That is you get the false claim, and then you get this extreme rigidity with how you break that down into a day-to-day marriage. It's just like extremely harmful book.
Yikes. And again, to go back to what you said earlier, being a young person, getting married, going into what could be your first serious relationship, and receiving this book as one of the only sources of advice that you get, that could be really impactful, I would think, on your whole relationship dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I read this book when I was with my first husband, and that relationship only lasted 3 years, and it's not like he was not abusive. We were just not a good match. But I remember even at the time thinking, like, this is a book that, again, marketed as like, this will fix everything. It didn't fix our incompatibility issue. It made me act weird. It honestly did. It made me act weird, and it kind of encouraged me to manipulate him in a way. He didn't know what was going on necessarily. And it gave him a little bit of like this inflated ego that he deserved all this respect or whatever too. Like for what? We were just having like conflicts like in other ways. But anyway, that I have my own experience with this book. Thankfully, it didn't cause me to get into harm, but I know people, I can tell you people, I wouldn't, but I know people who have, exactly. I know people in my life that have had direct harm because of this book in particular.
And there's this sort of attitude, we talk about like women's issues because in the Bible we're treated as second-class citizens, which is gross, but like these ideas of men are supposed to behave a certain way, like what the patriarchy teaches them, and if they're not that way in a relationship, that there's certain needs that have to be met, that they have a certain personality type, I'm not even talking about abuse, just your personality and what you want to have a relationship, but if these ideas are teaching like you need to be this way and you need to like be the man and be the head of the household and all that bullshit, like it's also harmful for men that don't want to follow into those patterns, just as bad enough it is for women.
I have to pull up a reference because there's a book, and I mentioned it last time that Cara and I were on secular sexuality. It's a book about I think it's called The Tough Standard, but it's talking about that the incongruence between what we're taught, or for especially the whole book's about being raised masculine, and like the incongruence between what they're told they need to be like versus what they actually feel like, and how it causes this like extreme it can cause all sorts of problems emotionally and depression and all, because they in themselves don't even fit that standard of this this masculinity that is promoted in these circles, because it's very rare, and honestly some of the things that they're explained on how to be fall closer to like the psychopathy section than anything else. So there's a lot of the really sweet emotionally attuned men out there who don't fit into that box themselves, and so it causes them a lot of distress too. It hurts everybody.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, we kind of tend to spend a lot of time talking about how, this can be harmful towards women and generate abuse and everything like that. But it's harmful to men too. These are outrageous standards to be asking anybody to try and make themselves into.
Like Erin, you said that you adapted a certain personality to get sort of like an attention and response from him, and in certain contexts, if you're the type of person, like a woman that can use emotional manipulation, emotional abuse, and gaslight somebody into thinking they're actually in charge, but you're the one that's turning the head, that's emotional abuse. And that's more subtle and more dark underbelly.
That is a very common expression, actually, like within women's Bible study. It's like I'm gonna get it wrong. I'm sure Janine is listening. She probably remembers it. It's something like he's the captain of the ship, but I steer it, or something.
Yeah.
And it's like this whole idea that like you are subtly manipulating your husband to act the way you want. And it falls right into like this book. It's just like, he's in charge, but is he really in charge, or am I just kind of like making him think that so he is nice to me and loves me? Like it's just really weird and really. I don't know. I hate the word. I was gonna say toxic. I was gonna say I kind of hate the word toxic because it's so undefined. But it's toxic.
Because you're not being genuine with one another, and that's the problem. And because if you're manipulating in any sort of circumstance where you're trying to get something from somebody else and not seeing each other as full human beings within your relationship, just roles, you're taking away the humanity of each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the running theme, in each of these that we've picked up on, is this idea of, making people into these stereotypes and caricatures of themselves that are not realistic at all. It's very unhelpful.
I think the undertone here is like this, it's prescriptivism, and it doesn't work. And like there's lots and lots of evidence that Christian marriages aren't any more successful. And I mean, often there's a lot of statistics that say they're less successful than other types of marriages that are out there. So it's not that there's, if we're looking at this from a secular viewpoint, these concepts are not evidence-based. They're not based in any, solid research or, things that you can actually like stand on the research of how people interact and how to best resolve. And when you have a rupture or repair in your relationship, like this doesn't give you any advice on that. Just bring him a beer when he gets home from work. Like that's not going to make your relationship any better.
It's not going to fix the fact that, one of us wants kids and the other one doesn't, or someone cheated.
Yeah, exactly.
He cheated on you. You just need to love him more.
That's right.
He won't do that again.
The advice would be is that he wandered because you weren't giving it up enough.
Oh yeah. It's your fault. It's your fault.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had one like that. It was that same one I was talking about earlier, where it straight up said, like, you need to watch your weight. Like, if he has a wandering eye, you better be careful, and you need to lose weight, most likely. And had all these anecdotes about, seeing couples,
disgusting.
and it's so unhelpful. I was like, are you kidding me? Really? This is the advice we're getting?
And,
Okay,
like,
thanks.
my husband's cheating on me because I like tacos. Okay.
Yeah.
That
Those
makes
5
sense.
pounds made all the
Oh,
difference.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. So I don't want to make light of some of the, very harmful effects
Yeah.
that, some of these themes and concepts can have. But as far as these books go, I'm wondering, can you think of any particularly funny or silly bits of advice that you got out of these that just make you
I
giggle?
can't. I can. I have this one that just, it never left me. I just always remembered it because it was so odd. From the book Sheet Music. So that first one that we talked about, the Christian sex book. The author was talking about a situation where the groom walks by and grabs his bride's breast. And his advice was to, rather than step back or recoil, to offer the other breast too. And and kind of, it was almost like likening it to Jesus, of like, offer the other cheek. And so that was like an example for wives to, if your husband at the time grabs you unexpectedly, drop what you're doing and take your shirt off, kind of thing, and give him the other one. It was so odd.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, someone said it in the chat. Turn the other tit.
Exactly. Yeah, it stuck with
Oh
me.
my goodness. That is really bizarre. I like it. That's wow. Okay. I want to know where does this advice come from? At what point is someone writing this book thinking, this is an important fact I need to impart to the young ones?
I don't know. When they don't get their ego checked regularly. I think these authors, because most of them are male authors too, and they've been in this circle for too long, and they, if they're already kind of like living within this system, it's not like their partners or wives are going to speak up and embarrass them, because that would be disrespectful. So they just can run away with these concepts with like almost no checking at all.
Yeah, you're right. It's, I guess if they're, the head of the relationship and they also wrote the book on good relationships,
Yeah.
their partner is required to tell them that everything they say is correct, I assume.
Sounds a little culty, if you ask
Yes,
me.
it does.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's funny. I feel like that needs to be our new motto or something. Turn the other tit. Okay, I'm gonna be laughing about that one for a while. Okay.
You're not going to forget about it either, because I never forgot about it. So.
I'm not. It's gonna be like the Kegel exercise sex. I will never forget that.
That is really funny.
Okay, so moving on then. I know one of the other topics you were going to talk to us about this evening that goes hand in hand with some of these books and relationship advice was premarital counseling. Now, I remember going through that as well. I also, like you, got married very young, first major relationship, and they had us go to this premarital counseling situation that was it was an experience. Tell us about your experience with that.
I think I had a like not as common of an experience, because I think there are some actual premarital counseling that maybe does give some proper advice, maybe like talk about how you're going to join finances, and who knows. My experience
actual
was
advice,
not that. We were told that we had to go to premarital counseling as well at the church. At the time, it was a Baptist church that we went to, and it was just a meeting with the senior pastor, and I sat down, and I don't think this person had any kind of training in counseling, not even biblical counseling. That would have been a step up from it. And definitely no counseling, like couples counseling or anything like that. So what it ended up being for me was a 4-weekly session where we sat there and came up with all the words of the alphabet that started with C. So caring, compassion, compromise, cleaning, concerns, and it just went on from there for like 4 weeks straight. And I swear that was the whole outline. We just came up with words that started with the letter C and tried to figure out how it could work with marriage. And I just, looking back now, it makes me laugh, because I know pastors and their alliterations for their sermon outlines. I think that's all it was.
Do you think he was using y'all to come up with new material?
I really do. I think he's like, here's some young people, maybe they know more words than me, so you guys tell me all the words you can think of that start with the letter C. It was so unhelpful.
Somebody said in the chat, sounds like Scattergory's Christian Marriage Edition.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. I was a full-on devoted Christian, but even I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever been forced to sit down and do. What a waste of my time. So, but I think that other ones in other churches, I think they like do have a curriculum or an outline of some sort. This guy didn't, but we got to tell everybody that we went to premarital counseling and we got to get married by the pastor. So that's all that happened.
Wow.
Like I'm just curious, it's just like a sidebar, like how many people like marriages and they're in front of a psychiatrist and say like our pastor gave us horrible advice and we don't know how to manage our relationship. Like like I can imagine that happens more common than people think, you know.
I think like, so to be like completely open, my husband and I now we've had marriage counseling. We've been together for going on like 13 years now, and we have 2 kids, and we actually like love marriage counseling. When you get to like with an actual like good counselor, it helps a lot with communication and, you know, just figuring these things out. He also came from a Christian background, so we both had these like weird gridlocks that we had from being raised in the church. There was just like certain things where we would just not communicate. So we've both kind of deconstructed those ideas, and it was really helpful. And our counselor at the time, he was like, yeah, this is such a common misunderstanding. And he said, without saying it, because he knew our backgrounds, that like, this, I see this all the time. He's like, this is a common one. Don't feel weird that you guys are having a hard time dealing with this issue, because it's practically every couple that comes in the door, and it's actually like not like, you know, just breaking down some of these common myths we had about marriage, like, and it was helpful. If anyone is like, even if things are going really well, I highly recommend getting in with like a good counselor, because there's like just always room for improvement too.
Yeah, and I think that's the, you know, because I also with the ideas with like, you know, purity, I'm going to call them purity marriages now. Like, you know, that there's certain, if you do these roles and if you do the thing that you're supposed to do, you're going to have a successful marriage and everything will be fine. And
yes, it's the purity prosperity gospel. That's what I've called it before too. Yeah, if you do it this way, you're going to be rewarded with this like super great sex life and a fulfilling marriage, and everything will be peachy.
Yeah, but we know, like, but you were saying like, hey, you know what, we went to marriage counseling and my marriage is better for it. You know, like me and my husband, you know, we haven't been to counseling, but I'm sure if we need to, I'd be like, you know, we're having this gridlock, maybe we should talk to somebody. You'd be like, okay, fine. You know, and having those open communications and having those open doors. But if you're in these purity marriages, they're saying like, oh no, you know, don't go talk to the secular psychiatrist. If you just follow the recipe, you're gonna have this beautiful chocolate cake. But really, it's like, yeah, it looks beautiful on the inside, but it's filled with shit.
Yeah, totally. Or like, it's like only go to biblical counselors or Christian counselors.
Exactly, which is also not a good idea.
Yeah, it's this kind of keeping the gatekeeping of like, or, you know, I guess the opposite of gatekeeping, but like keeping you within this little bubble of making sure that you don't get any advice that falls outside of that framework. So
because people can be Christian counselors without necessarily having a certification or anything that would be recognized, you know, outside of the church. So even though they're calling themselves counselors, they may or may not be qualified to the degree that they would be certified as a counselor in their state. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize that.
Yes. It's know your certifications in your state or province. If you're in Canada, like know what counselors have, like what they need to have to actually know what they're talking about. Because I mean, I think Shannon has a really big Shannon Q from Shannon.
That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, I can hear a Shannon rant.
I can hear Shannon in my head too.
In my head.
Shannon did like this huge breakdown about like what biblical counseling and like what that actually means, and it's like it's infuriating. So if you go look at it, make sure you know who you're going to see and what their credentials are and what's their theories that they use, and make sure that they're not going to be subtly suggesting anything that's like of a religious undertone. And if they are, but they're stating that they are, you know, the certified clinical counselor, then they also need to be possibly reported, because that's, you know, that there are heavy ethical restrictions around this stuff. So, but if you're a biblical counselor and you're doing counseling out of a church, you get to just skate by all of that. So,
Yeah,
So check
and I'm
out
just gonna,
seculartherapy.org
Speaking of
if
yeah,
you want a
like,
counselor that is actually
Yeah.
licensed
Yeah.
and
And if you're,
using evidence-based
and I'm just
therapy.
gonna put the sidebar out there. You have every right, if you're going to go to therapy, to interview your therapist.
yes.
You, if for a first session, like, have conversations, I do exactly what you said, Erin. I talk about like what modalities they are, where they get their education from, what is their view of counseling. Because if you find that you start having conversation, you're like, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for, then you like date, like you're dating
Yes.
therapists, like find a good relationship with the therapist, like do it like you would find a partner, like date them.
Yes.
Do some
And
interviews.
But
don't
don't
be
actually date them.
Don't actually date them, but like professionally date.
yeah, like shop around.
Yeah, go shopping.
Find somebody that has the same, the same value system, or like that you're kind of wanting to stick within. And like, yeah, I think the key word here is like evidence-based. Like go find people who are going to be using proven and like the modalities that are actually helpful, not ones that are like, go read a chapter of Ecclesiastes every day if you're struggling with your sex life or whatever.
You can hold the rose quartz and meditate, and your heart will open, Erin. So
that's funny. Yeah. I took a dip into new age stuff for a while. So
I was a number 13 years girl. So
yeah,
I hear you.
Yeah. I bought my husband a citrine rock when we started our business.
I love it. That kind of makes me wonder. How do you think you would have approached relationships differently had you not been exposed to the ideas you got out of these books, but instead something different? How did your perspective change over time, or what do you think might have been different?
I can't answer that 100%. Like, how would I have acted differently? I could very well be, at the same place where I am right now. I think that with my first relationship, I think that I wouldn't have gotten married. Just flat out, I wouldn't have, because I knew that I wasn't ready yet. And the marriage happened because of a lot of pressure at the church, because honestly, I'd been dating this guy for 4 months. And so the next step in everyone's mind was to get married. So had I known that I could have just said no, and that I could have even just said not right now, I would have, because that was just a tumultuous 3 years of my life. And it was a kind of, I say I regret it, but I mean, like, whatever. I was young. It was just a tough time, and I learned from it. But I think that would have changed my view on what marriage was. I think I did do things differently with my current husband. I hate saying current husband, but we did do things differently. At that point, I had realized that purity culture was bullshit, and so we didn't wait. We lived together. It was a totally different way that we started off that relationship. We ended up getting married too, and we're still married, and those things are different. But I think that the biggest thing that changed the way that I see my husband and view relationships was actually when I accepted evolution. As odd as that sounds, that was when my biggest mind shift happened. Yeah.
Oh, how so?
The taking it away from being like, we're these creations of God, and there's this ultimate kind of thing that we're like working towards as a marriage. Even just the taking away that idea that like your soul ties and like all this spooky, honestly, like spooky supernatural stuff with relationships, and just seeing my husband as an ape and seeing myself as an ape really helped. You're just like, there's a whole bunch of reasons and explanations behind how we behave and why we behave, and being social creatures, and understanding how important our attachments are, and childhood stuff, and all, like, really accepting that and kind of looking at it through that lens really, really helped me. And more than any self-help book I think ever did. Because you can have a lot more grace. I have way more grace now as an atheist for my husband than I ever did as a Christian, and I think he has a lot more grace for me now too.
Oh, that's a really interesting perspective, and I see what you mean. It's more authentic. There's not all this, magical prescriptions about if you do the formula, you're going to get this. Like, no, you're not. Things are messy sometimes.
Yeah. It's just messy, and we're all just like creatures, or not creatures like creation, but we're all just animals trying to get our needs met. And like, if people screw up, I screw up, everybody screws up sometimes. And we know a lot more about humans and how we function best than I was ever allowed to know before when I was a Christian. So it's just like this interesting field where I got to like learn about, was like, oh, we've actually done like experiments on like relationships and stuff. And we actually, all these like nebulous questions that I thought were just kind of like, you have to pray on it. There's actually some pretty good answers out there, because we've been trying to figure out how people work in relationship with each other for a long time. So, I mean, it's not perfect. We don't have all the answers, but there's a lot more answers than I ever thought there were.
There's some really good, like, people that actually study relationships as like their field in psychology, that maybe you should go read their books.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, on conflict resolution and what makes a good marriage, than like going to your pastor who, or like in my case, a priest that never been married. So which happens, you know, and it's not healthy. So, you know, like, seek out the professionals, people. It will serve you better.
Yeah, I love that distinction y'all are making too. Like, the difference between, you know, something that's been researched versus something that, you know, we want to tell you you're supposed to be this way. And I feel like in a lot of religious faiths, it seems like, especially in Christianity, if you're focusing in on the New Testament, you know, love is the central concept. It's, you know, you're supposed to really have a good grasp on what love is and how to love people. And I like that focus, but did you ever feel like the love that is being prescribed to you is you're kind of getting some mixed messages about what that is actually supposed to look like in practice?
Oh, like 100%. It's honestly the most confusing message, really. I still sometimes think, like, what on earth were they trying to get me to know here? Because they teach love at the same time as they kind of subtly emphasize judgment, or, you know, discrimination, or and it's different. Like, when you're talking about, like, they like to talk about like the love of your child, but then they talk about like this discipline and like this harshness that you have to take, and you have to use, what is the thing, like, spare the rod,
spoil the child.
And then you get with
like that train up a child bullshit.
Right.
That's
and then it's just a
child abuse.
And it's just a subtle difference when they talk about romantic love, right? It's like you can get on very current conservative Christian marriage podcasts and hear them talking about like how they need to steer and discipline their wives, and like, it's not that different from the parental model of love, which is like this mix of fear and love and judgment, and, you know, like, it's not that healthy. Whereas we know now, there's still, like, I mean, the topic of love is still open for a lot of people. There's still a conversation going on. But one thing that is for sure that I've learned outside of the Christian framework is that generally love is defined with the absence of fear or judgment. And so those are kind of incompatible ideas, I think, which is Christianity kind of tries to shove them into the same spot, but they are like pretty incompatible.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, well, we are getting close to the end of our time here, but I would love to know, as we kind of wrap up, could you maybe summarize for us, you know, what are some elements of marriage and relationship literature that you would consider to be red flags based on your experience? If you pick up a self-help book and it starts talking about this, take it with a grain of salt.
Well, I think that not that there's necessarily like a certain phrase, but if you are reading a book and you're picking up on these kind of elements of essentialism, where you get any kind of language, you're talking about like women need this and men need this, anything that is very rigid like that, you're kind of already on a bad track for getting actual helpful advice, because that is it's just not accurate at all. We know that almost everything in human nature exists on a spectrum. So that would be maybe like one stark way you'll find out in the first chapter of a relationship help book that it is not the right book for you if you are anywhere on that spectrum, which we all are. So that was probably my number one kind of advice to steer clear of. And definitely, as mentioned earlier, like, know who you're getting your advice from, whether it's a counselor or if it's an author. Look at their credentials and see like where are they basing their theories in. Because if you just saw woo-hooey, which like kind of like thing that is just an idea, people have ideas all the time, people have theories all the time, but the solid things you're going to read are going to have something to support it, some reports and things like that. So do your research. Not to sound like that, but
evidence-based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
YouTubers, not research, people.
No.
University of YouTube is not research.
Yes, exactly.
Even though you can find us on there, we are also not
Yes.
research. We just point you in the direction of resources. Speaking of which, do you have any resources that you would recommend for us, Erin?
I do, and because I'm talking from my own like life experiences. Like I said, I've been serially monogamous, as most of us are. I mean, a lot of us are. I think one of the best long-term monogamous relationship books is What Makes Love Last by John Gottman. John Gottman is one of the most cited clinical marriage researchers. His methods are all evidence-based. He's stuck couples in rooms and studied them for days and days at a time. Like his work is solid, and there's a lot of his methods have been put into practice for years and years. So I mean, he's a pretty solid person to look for. The other book that I'm just currently reading and finishing up here is called Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. This one's a more creative and flexible look at relationships, even long-term relationships, on how to balance things, kind of like your comfort and your safety and this excitement and kind of chaotic part that we all kind of crave too. And that one is very queer and poly-friendly. Those are my two faves.
I like it. I knew you were going to help me add to my Goodreads list, and now it's happened.
I don't know if people have time to read.
Well, I didn't say I was going to read them. I said I was going to add them to my list.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Oh, okay. There's
List
a
grows
disclaimer
faster than my ability to complete it. But I know I've definitely heard of Gottman. He's
I've
the
heard of him
one
too.
that has the sort of, is it like the 4 kind of like red flags in a
Yeah, he's
relationship?
got the
Four
four
horsemen
horsemen.
of a marriage, of
Yeah.
ending of a relationship. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's pretty
have-
like it's widely known and
Mhm.
and cited in most marriage kind of stuff now. So
I know Dr. Ray knows who he is. Yep.
I
got a thumbs up. There we go.
All right, it is approved. Add that to your reading list now. All right.
I was
well,
going to jump in, but then I realized I get a whole time to talk later. But I'm going to talk about Gutman. Thank you.
excellent. Okay.
I knew you were sitting on the edge of your seat, Darrell. I knew.
And it's almost that time too, so we'll get to you in just a second. And before we do wrap up and go to Q&A, Erin, do you have anything else you want to leave us with? Any thoughts to share?
Kind of wrap it all up in a nice little package. I think my takeaway here is that there is no miracle formula for love. There are indeed lots of well-researched and evidence-based theories out there. Read widely, explore, and don't accept any one person's prescription for how to find or keep love.
Ooh, I like that.
I like that too. That is wonderful advice. And I really like that. That makes me feel good. That's very good advice, Erin.
Yeah. Thank you. That really did wrap it up with a bow.
I know. Wasn't that nice?
Well done. Well, okay, it's about time then to go to Q&A, but before we do, Erin, where can people find you? Do you have any links?
Yeah, I you can find me like as on my you can get a hold of me on Twitter for one thing. I'm not on there a whole bunch now, but I am still on there at Twitter at Exxtian Erin. It's Exxtian spelled EXXTIAN. Erin, ERIN. You can find me there, but you can also find me over at Truth Wanted on the Atheist community of Austin. It's a call-in show. It happens every Friday night at 7 p.m. Central, and I'm on there once a month or so. I've also been on Secular Sexuality as of late too, and we'll be on there on Thursday. So you can check me out there too.
I will see you on there on Thursday as well.
That's right.
Yeah, don't forget to check that out. Okay. So I guess now would be the time to go to Q&A. So let's see, we have a few questions here, and if anybody else has a question that they would like to ask, go ahead and type it into the chat and we'll collect it. We'll get through as many of them as we can in the next 15 or 20 minutes. And let's see, to start out with, someone asked, oh, I'm not sure what this is. They ask, in your religious community, did y'all do something called resting in the spirit? Do you know what that is?
Yes, soaking is another one, although it has a different reference for Mormonism. It's not soaking like that. That's different. But yeah, resting, like you're just sitting in and kind of like I think this is what they're talking about anyway. You're kind of often to be like lying on the floor and you have like worship music on or something, and you're kind of like in this like trance kind of like state and just absorbing all the goodness. If that's what they're talking about, yes, we did that.
Can't you just do that by smoking a bowl? Listening?
Absolutely. Or just literally putting on,
I'm just saying,
literally putting on any of your favorite music. I actually still use that as like my own like a regulating thing. Sometimes like I get overwhelmed, and I was a bass player. I like bass.
I married a bass player, so yeah, I appreciate
something happens to my brain when I hear bass. So when I'm overstimulated, I will put my speaker on and I'll put it on the ground and I'll lie on the ground and listen to my music. And that is my secular soaking that I still do.
Secular soaking. Okay.
That sounds kinky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, go look up soaking in Mormonism. That's way more kinky.
There could be a lot of directions this goes. Okay, we'll talk more on Thursday. All right. Helen, do you have a question?
Yes. So somebody was asking, do you have any comments on the overt sexual themes in medieval Christian mysticism?
So can you say that one more time?
Yeah. Any comments on the overt sexual themes and medieval Christian mysticism?
Ooh, yes, like the Jesus, like the paintings of Jesus' vagina. That's like one of my favorite topics. I think that's what we're talking about.
I want to see Jesus with vagina.
Yeah. So I'm gonna butcher this, but one of my favorite things I ever learned about during my deconstruction was this. It was the nuns. I wasn't raised Catholic. I'm going to get things wrong here, but there was like this whole kind of group of people who became like really enthralled with like the wound on the side of Jesus during his crucifixion. And there was like poems written and like these huge things devoted to like the femininity and the sexuality of like the slit on the side of his body. So if you look it up, you can see paintings from that era too. And it was kind of mostly, I think it was written by nuns, not necessarily monks. And like there's kind of like this like overt kind of gay undertone to it. I don't know. It's actually like really cool. And if you haven't looked at it, go look it up. It's like one of the most fascinating things. I would have never heard about it during my my days at church, because of course not. But
I was Catholic and I didn't know about this, but now
it's kind of like
I have to go do a deep dive.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And there's paintings of it, and it's a picture of a vagina, but it's or a vulva, but it's referenced as Jesus's wound. Yeah.
There is so much to unpack there.
I'm getting George O'Keeffe vibes, like George O'Keeffe.
I am definitely going to fall down this rabbit hole.
We're going to fall down the rabbit hole, Cara.
It's fantastic. It's one of my favorites.
That is excellent. Googling now. Meanwhile, someone else was asking, in the books that you were referencing, to what extent is the expectation about sex that it is just meant to be a means of reproduction? Or is it more than that? Or what was the messaging there?
I don't think that in the books that I was talking about, it was emphasized as much as it is now, honestly. I think that it definitely is an undertone, but I mean, in the book Sheet Music, like it definitely did talk about pleasure, and it's kind of one of the pros that I put on that one in particular, because it is supposed to be fun and pleasurable. The emphasis is more about fulfilling the sexual needs of your husband. And I will say that when I talk about getting a message without getting the message, without saying it directly, the sheer lack of conversation about different types of methods of contraception, like there's a lack of conversation about it, because there is this undertone that you won't use it because you're having sex within a marriage. So it is like always for the use of God to make a baby, if that's his timing or whatever. So it's kind of like this weird undertone because of the lack of information, if that makes sense. But no, it wasn't like always overt that it was meant for reproduction. It wasn't, it was definitely the Protestant book category as well too. So maybe that was part of why that is.
Yeah, I think that was the case in the ones that I read too.
Yeah.
I later looked up one of them, that same one I keep referencing. I looked at a later edition of it, and they had added a chapter about contraception, but the whole point of the chapter was basically you don't need to use that for various reasons. Don't worry about it. God will decide.
Yeah, I mean, that is the undertone for most of those books, is that it's not really up for you to control, and you can't play God by doing that. And I mean, in other books, there's going to be more overt references to like the pill being an abortive, or you know, just thwarting God's plan on your life. So it kind of depends on the framework you're coming from. But if it's not said, it is said. It's implied in a lot of these books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. Oof.
Well, that's
All
not
right.
a good idea.
No. All right. What else do we have?
So, would you recommend the 5 Love Languages book? I'm going to say probably not, with a caveat.
I would say, because it's so common, you should read it, so you actually know how to like address it when people bring it up. But don't read it to like take it in and live by it. But I mean, I'm of that position where like you should just read everything that you can get your hands on for the most part. It's not a tough read by any means. You can get through it in a couple of days. It's not a complex book. But because it's like a cultural reference point a cultural reference thing at this point, and it's so widely accepted, you should know what it actually says. If you even just skim it, or like get that Blinkist and do the 15-minute summary thing, just something, have some understanding of what it actually says.
Yeah. So when you're on, a dating app and it asks you what your love language is, you could at least attempt to answer the question, right?
Tacos and tequila.
Exactly.
That's my love language.
Well, and so here's a follow-up on that about the Love Languages book. Someone said, I very much don't want to get divorced, and I think that is preventing me from pursuing romantic relationships. And to a certain extent, I would like to divorce-proof a marriage, quote unquote, but not necessarily from a Christian perspective. I have ADD, and I feel that I need tools and systems and techniques to help me be successful. And I like the 5 love languages as it provides a sense of structure and organization that I feel I thrive on. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about this.
Yeah, systematic things. I'm a systematic type thinker as well. So I think that is why I like the other book, the John Gottman's stuff, because it is also somewhat systematic. It does lay out kind of like here, like we said, the 4 horsemen of relationships ending. Like it is, I do appreciate that it is quite clear. So just because it's not listed as like the top 5 love languages doesn't mean there's not other systematic ways of looking at your relationship. Or when you meet with somebody too, like a counselor, they often do have outlines and things for you to work through. There is better options, basically, is what I'm saying. Look for things that have a bit of more of a systematic way to go through it, because I mean, that's a really normal fear to have, that you don't want to commit a long time to somebody and have it end unexpectedly. But at the same time, you can't always predict what's going to happen, so you can just do the best that you can do, right? And don't get involved with somebody who's going to be abusive and that kind of thing too. So do your own a bit of self-work too before you get into it.
Yeah, that's right. And this is completely my opinion here, but sometimes it seems like the best option is sometimes to leave the relationship. And if that's the case, that's not a failure, that's the correct decision. So it's
I'm glad you brought that up too, because just even like this fear, like this, I don't want to get a divorce thing, like why is that coming up in the first place? Like this language around it, like it can't ever end if it was, if it started. Like there's something to deconstruct there too, if there's such a fear of it ending. So you can kind of, I mean, that's like kind of a lot of people get stuck with like procrastinating and other things too. Like if it can't be perfect, I don't want to do it at all. And that is something to kind of maybe like think about a little bit deeper, and just look into a little bit more about why that is so scary. But reasonable. It's a reasonable fear for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like nobody wants to be in a relationship that ends because, they accidentally acted like a big jerk or, something like that.
I didn't use the love language.
Well, and also
it was so easy and I didn't do it.
I'm going to have my 2 cents in there as a neurodivergent person that has ADHD. There are better structures that you can use to get that structure to work on relationship issues than using the 5 love languages. Like there's better resources out there, because I know as a neurodivergent, I like pattern, I like a little bit of stability because we have crazy brains. We have very busy brains and very distractible brains. I don't want to say crazy because that's not the right term. We just have a different brain, and there's better tools out there than to use that as a tool. And also too, like if this is like I'm going to advise, again, go to the Secular Therapy Project and maybe seek out marriage counseling, seek out, or look or connect with someone that can give you better resources and work on those issues. Because whether you get a divorce or not, whatever tools you're going to need are going to either help you in this relationship or any relationship going forward.
Yeah.
As a neurodivergent person, also that want someone that wants to have healthy relationships. So, that's kind of my feeling on it as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I know with the 5 love languages, like we talked about, it is one of those things that's kind of found its way into the mainstream. And I think there are some therapists who use that model. I can't speak to that personally. I am not a therapist, but I mean, if it's something that's helping you, I mean, okay, take what's helpful. Just, read everything with a grain of salt. There may be some things in there that are, little bits and pieces of things that aren't so helpful. Don't take those.
Well,
But-
I think I don't know if it was you or Helen earlier that mentioned like the Myers-Briggs. Like
Mhm.
there's
I
nothing
think we
wrong with
both
reading.
kind of touched on it.
There's nothing wrong with like reading about it. Because it's a jumping off point. I think if you kind of use that as the framework, that like, okay, so like if I'm starting at square one, like what's a good place to start? See it like that, and just know in the back of your mind that there's better and more to get into after this. But this is it's not the worst book in the world. It's just not the best.
Yeah. That's not a terrible recommendation for a book.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and the next question is a pretty good follow-up to that. Helen, do you want to field that one?
Yes. So, do you have any idea on how these books started getting developed? What do you think? What was the theory and idea behind them?
I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. I feel like I want to make up something right now. Like no, I don't actually. I have to look into the history of that, of why they started. I mean, like the self-help genre as a thing started at some point too. There's marriage advice books that go back like all the way to like the 50s and 40s, and like kind of same as like etiquette books and like girls proper behavior of young women and stuff like that. I don't know exactly like the history of the self-help genre in particular, but Christians are they're not separate from that either. So I think anything that happens in like broader culture is going to have a Christian kind of niche to it as well. As far as like these intense marriage books, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with the purity culture, and like it flows with the greater culture of the Christian movement at the time too. So I think that's why we got so many books about this in the 90s, because that's what was going on then. It was a heavy emphasis on purity and abstinence, and so you get the accompanying books to that too. But I'm not saying I know the answer 100%. And I'm going to look into that.
Well, and like I wondered too, like this is just a theory, like you were spouting that this is reactionary because because of we live in the United States, and evangelicals are losing their shit, and we're over here going like, hey, maybe we should talk about relationships differently. Maybe we should talk about marriage and divorce and what it means to be healthy in a different way. And then like you got like the evangelicals, it's like, no, one man, one woman, marriage, babies. And this is the way it's supposed to be. We're going to write books about it so people will stay in the nice little boxes we want them to stay in.
They need to give kind of an alternative to whatever's being presented on what I hate these words, like on the pop level or whatever. So I mean, we're going to talk about like the gender spectrum. They're going to have more books about being a woman or whatever, and like more of this masculinity and getting back to masculinity. Like that, we see that happening right now. So I mean, even just maybe the fact that divorces you could get a no-fault divorce, maybe stuff like that had to do with it. Like, oh, we can't have women just getting no-fault divorces now, and so we need to write books on marriage. Like, I don't know. There's probably a lot of links there, and it's probably like a web of things. As all things are.
Like a Russian doll. Like, many different layers of like why these ideas have permeated the culture. So I'm sure it's a very complicated and convoluted story if we really looked into it and stuff. But like, we definitely, those of us that have come out of religion definitely have our theories.
Oh yeah.
For sure. Okay, well, I think we've got time for just one or two more questions. And if we don't get to your question, I apologize, but stick around for the hangout and you can ask it there. This is an interesting one. Someone is wondering, what do you think is the most dangerous piece of commonly taught by everyday people advice? For example, there's other fish in the sea, or you got to love yourself before others can love you, men give, women receive, etc. Like, what's the worst, like, cliche advice in your mind?
They already said it. They already said it. This, from what I understand about relationships, that you have to love yourself before you get into a relationship, because my understanding is that we understand ourselves within relationships as well. So it's like you can't ever like reach this epitome of like your perfect self before you get into, and you're always in relationships. I mean, unless there's something going on in your life and you're isolating a lot, you're always in relationships with people, and that is how we know ourselves, and that's how we, you know, you obtain these things, and that's how you grow and you change and you trigger each other and you work through these things. So I think it's kind of an impossible thing to say that like you can't get into a relationship or have a successful relationship unless you are like this perfectly healed person, which what does that mean anyway? But I'm speaking as like just a human. I'm not a therapist or anything like that, but I've been around the block a few times and I've seen my own growth within a relationship, and I look back on like when we first got together and where we are now, and like if I had waited until now, it just would never have happened. So I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. All right, well, I think that is a good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really interesting conversation, and you have given us a lot of things to think about, as well as books for our Goodreads book list. So thank you for that as well. I cannot wait to have you back on again. You're
Thank
invited
you.
for a repeat.
Yeah, you're part of the RfR family now, Erin. We're gonna absorb you into the cult. The cult.
I'm 20%
cult.
cooler now. 20%
One of
cooler.
us.
You are 20%
Yes.
cooler because you hung out with me. That makes you 20% cooler.
That is how that works.
It's
So,
science.
yeah,
It's
not
evidence
really.
based.
Yeah, it's
Look.
totally evidence based.
Lies. But yeah, it's definitely been great having you, and thank you so much, and stick around. You're going to be able to stay for a little bit of the hangout, right?
Yes, I will.
Perfect. Okay, fantastic. So if we didn't get to your question, stick around for the hangout, and Erin will still be here. And don't forget that we'll be back, same time, same place, next week. And our speaker next week is going to be the fabulous Helen.
Yes, so I'm
Yes.
going to be doing a talk next week on magical thinking and how to let go of it after you leave religion. Because though many of us will move away from these structures, we do not always know how to think and look at things objectively when we leave religion. Magical thinking starts when we are in childhood and doesn't always leave us as we move into adults, and we still do it. If you've ever sat in your car trying to get it to start and beg it for it to start, and if you just sit there and be like, please start, that is a form of magical thinking. So how do we work through these things, and when is it harmful and when is it harmless? So that will be my talk next week.
That is definitely going to be a good one. I cannot wait. So definitely join us for that. And in the meantime, if you can't get enough RfRx in your life, we're on YouTube. So check us out. Watch some previous episodes on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have questions, comments, ideas for future shows, you can email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And Helen, where else can people find cool content?
Okay, so I'm going to do my regular every week, almost every week talk that if you want to find us, we have a blog. So if you want to find out more people that have gone through recovering from religion and their own deep conversion stories, please go to medium.com/excommunications for our blog. Also, too, we have again, you can find us on our podcast that we mentioned before. So you can go to recoveringfromreligion.org, our podcast, to get more of that information. Also, too, we are on the socials. So please like, share, subscribe, ring bells, whatever you got to do on Facebook. We have a Facebook main page. We have a Facebook support group page. We have a Twitter until Elon burns it to the ground. Well, we're just waiting for it to happen. But until that happens, please engage on the Twitter. We are on Instagram and we are on TikTok. So this is where you can find out where we post a lot of the stuff that's going on with recovering from religion, support groups, things that we got coming up. So please engage on those and like, share, and subscribe, especially share with people that you think might need our services, because it does really help with engagements and for people to find us. So that is it. Now we're going to move into the end.
Dr. Ray, welcome back.
Well, thank you. And man, Erin, this was even better than I expected. Kara, I think we should lock her in for like a 5-year contract. What are we paying her, by the way?
Oh, she's getting the big atheist bucks.
All the
Same as
atheist
all of
money,
us.
make it rain of zeros.
No, it really was. Erin, this was really excellent. And thank you so much for exposing that those horrible books. But I especially appreciate exposing 5 love languages. It's 80% bullshit. And I would disagree with you on one thing. I would start with the best you can find, not fill your head with shit. And then, read Gottman. Gottman is the gold standard in relationship research, and you just can't get any better. And he himself admits where he and his wife admit where they've failed. They've not gotten the results they wanted in their research. But, even even research that doesn't go the way you want is still teaching you something.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about him and his laboratory and his whole approach. So anyway, I will tell you that I have an 1890s marriage manual, and it is hilarious and horrifying at the same time. I've been looking for it this whole time you've been talking about it. I cannot find it. It's around here somewhere in my library, but I can't put my finger on it. Anyway, I wanted to read a couple passages out of it if I could find them, but I will spare you that tonight. I would agree with you on the evolutionary biology. That was a game changer for me as well. Just learning evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology helped me understand. I studied bonobos and chimps and stuff like that. As you know, you've read my book, Sex and God. Those are great animal models for a lot of stuff that we experience as human animals, as apes. I thought that was cool. Okay, we're just apes. Let's act like it in a good way. I also agree that premarital counseling is bullshit in most cases, especially if it's with a pastor. There are people who can do good premarital counseling. I'm not going to say that's wrong, but boy, stay away from ministers. They are not trained in this stuff, and they can give you some pretty bad advice. As a clinician, I even trained ministers back when I was still a Christian psychologist, but very liberal. I trained ministers. I have rarely met a minister who had a happy marriage. I rarely met a minister who had a happy sex life. And most of the ministers I know had basically a sexless marriage. So who the hell are they to give you advice? Or they're no better off than the Catholic priest giving you advice. I will also say, I think, answer to one of those questions is, I think we only grow in relation. We don't grow by reading a book. We have to be in relation to another human being in order to grow. So whether it's a marriage or a sexual relationship or not, I don't care, but every relationship brings opportunity for you to grow. So you don't have to have counseling to do that, but you do have to pay attention. I've been married twice, and I learned a lot from my 2 first marriages. And sometimes it was totally my fault. It was totally stuff I was doing that I could have learned and did learn to do better probably. But I just think we have to realize that we do learn through relationships, and to not be afraid to engage in some relationships for the benefit of the learning. If for nothing else, you're going to learn how to be kinder to people. You're going to learn how to be more considerate, how to read their emotions, how to express your emotions. I mean, there's a lot of positive things that come, even in a relationship that doesn't last very long. I've dated people earlier for only 2 or 3 months, and I still carry the lessons I learned from them in those few months. So don't be afraid to grow through relationships. That would be one of mine. I'll also say that I was born in 1950, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s, started dating when I was 16. And I look back and say, the women's movement was really hitting hard. Quote, they called it women's lib back then. And there was so much good information about birth control. Even the churches were involved. This whole thing against abortion and birth control is fairly new, since about 1980. And mostly the Protestants pushed that, even though the Catholics have jumped on board as well. But that's a new thing in our environment, this anti-birth control and stuff like that. It's just abortion, all that stuff's fairly new. And last couple of things is Gottman is the gold standard. Like I said earlier, go read him. Then if you want to read some of this other stuff to laugh, that's great. But you're going to get good science-based stuff from him. And if you're looking for a therapist, here's something I wanted to jump in there earlier, Kara, but I didn't. If you want to find a good therapist, but you can't find one within the Secular Therapy Project, you can go to seculartherapy.org, hit the button that says register as a therapist. Now, you're not going to register as a therapist. You're just hitting that button. And then the next page will show you the requirements for applying and getting admitted to the Secular Therapy Project. You can then print those off and take them to whatever counselor you're considering using and ask them, do they agree to these? And if they do, move ahead. If they don't, get out of there quick, because you're basically creating your own Secular Therapy Project by doing it that way. Last, marriage counseling is a good way to get a reality check. I think it's a great thing to do. So even just a 2 or 3 sessions sometimes can really trip your trigger and help you realize there's some things. I know in my own life, I've been married twice, and I realize in my current relationships, I still see myself being triggered by shit I learned in my first marriage. And has nothing to do with them. They're innocent. It's me. It's my responses to them. And I have to say, wait a minute, that's not what Barb does. That's what my first wife did. And then I have to back off and recalibrate. And it takes years to get over some of this stuff sometimes. Anyway, that's where it is. One more thing, Kara, I'm going to jump in here. I've taken longer than normal, I know, but there's a phenomena in the Middle Ages called the Sheila na gig. Go look it up. I'm talking you, Erin. You mentioned the vaginas on Jesus's womb. Well, this is even crazier. I mean, no, not crazier, but just as crazy. It's called Sheila, and that's Sheela, then N-A, and then G-I-G. All over Ireland are these Sheila na gigs, and they're pornographic statues way, way high up on the cathedrals. There's a lot of them in Ireland. There's quite a few in England, and they stretch clear across Europe, clear to Romania. You'll see them. The farther you get away from Ireland, the fewer they are. I don't know I don't know much of the history of it, but they're all sexual. They have all sorts of sexual innuendos, and well, I'll just let you go online and Google that. You'll find it very interesting. Back to you, Kara.
Excellent. I am definitely going to fall down that rabbit hole later. Thank you for that. I love it.
Yeah, you won't thank me later. You can't unsee that shit. I'll tell you that.
I'll be messaging you later. Why,
Darrel? Why?
I love it.
You love me.
I just looked it up while he was talking, and you could see my face. I just went.
Outstanding. This is what we come here for.